Mr. Speaker, can I start by wishing everyone a very happy Pride Month, and especially those taking part in the Pride March this Saturday and similar marches around the country. But we should also be aware that a survey taken by Pride in London found that half of LGBT people in London had experienced hate crime in the past 12 months. I joined the Prime Minister in wishing the NHS a very happy birthday. I was hoping she was going to say a bit more about NHS staff and their pay during her birthday greetings. Because, Mr. Speaker, after a week of flip-flopping and floundering, we thought we got some clarity from Downing Street at last. On Monday, the announcement was that the public sector pay cap at 1% remains, and a rare moment of agreement between number 10 and 11 was seen. But yesterday we had news that firefighters are going to be offered 2% this year and 3% next year. So can the Prime Minister confirm whether the public sector pay cap will remain for all other public servants until 2020?
First of all, may I join the Right Honourable Gentleman in wishing everybody who's going to take part in Pride London on Saturday an excellent day. I'm sure it will be a very good occasion, as it always has been. And can I also say that I and all members of this House value the work that is done, incredibly important work done by public sector workers, including those in the National Health Service and others. And I understand why people feel strongly about the issue of their pay. But perhaps I can just set out, for the information of the House, Mr. Speaker, perhaps I can just set out what the current position is. We have had 3 pay review bodies in the public sector reporting in March. That covered doctors and dentists, NHS staff, including nurses, and the armed forces. And the government accepted the recommendations in all 3 of those cases. The firefighters award is not a matter that is determined by government. It's determined by the employers, and it is not subject to a pay review body. There are outstanding pay review body reports. Those cover teachers, prison officers, police officers and senior salaries, and the government will consider those reports very carefully and will respond to them. But while we do that, we will always recognise the need to ensure that we take those decisions against the need to live within our means. The Right Honourable Gentleman and I both value public sector workers and our public services. The difference is, I know we have to pay for them.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, the public sector pay cap causes real shortages in nursing and teaching and many other professions, as well as real hardship. I had a letter last week from a teacher called David. It's all right, he's a teacher, he's doing a good job, all right? And he says, and I quote, "I've been teaching for 10 years. I've seen my workload increase. I've seen more people leave the profession than start, and no form of pay increase in 7 years. The only thing holding the education system together is the dedication to struggle on for their students and staff." And he says this dedication is starting to run out. So what we're doing by this pay cap, I say to the Prime Minister, is recklessly exploiting the goodwill of public servants like David. They need a pay rise.
Minister!
The Leader of the Opposition refers to the numbers of nurses and teachers that we have in working in the public sector. Of course, we now have more nurses in our hospitals than we had in 2010. We have more teachers in our schools. But let me remind the Right Honourable Gentleman of why it has been necessary for us to exercise restraint in public spending, including capping public sector pay. It's because we inherited the biggest deficit in our peacetime history. We have acted.
Order! I've noticed earlier, Mr Mahmood, that you seem to be in a very hyper condition today. I would recommend you take some sort of soothing medicament or go and lie down for a little while. You'll probably feel better at the end of it. Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we have acted to bring that deficit down by a quarter, a half. It's now down by 3/4. At the same time, we've seen the economy grow and we've seen record levels of people in employment. Our policy on public sector pay has always recognised that we need to balance the need to be fair to public sector workers, to protect jobs in the public sector, and to be fair to those who pay for it. That is the balance we need to strike, and we continue to assess that balance.
Jeremy Corbyn.
We've had 7 years of tax cuts for the richest and tax breaks for the biggest corporation. And last year, Mr. Speaker, there was a net loss of 1,700 nurses and midwives to the NHS, and in the first 2 months of this year alone, 3,264 have left the profession altogether. Not a great birthday present for the NHS, is it? Last week, the Chancellor said, "We all value our public services and the people who provide them to us," and went on to laud his own economic record by saying that we had a fundamentally robust economy. Well, the Prime Minister found £1 billion to keep her own job. Why can't she find the same amount of money to keep nurses and teachers in their job, who, after all, serve all of us?
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman talks about the number of nurses. In fact, I think some of those figures he was talking about was the number of nurses who are registered in the United Kingdom. There are about 600,000 nurses registered in the United Kingdom. About half of them, 300,000, work in the NHS in England. And contrary to what he says, we have 13,000 more nurses working in the NHS today than compared to 2010. I understand that it has been hard for people who've been working hard and making sacrifices over the years as we've been dealing with Labour's mismanagement of the economy. But let me remind the right honourable gentleman of what happens when you don't deal with the deficit. It's not a theoretical issue. Let's look at those countries that failed to deal with it. In Greece, where they haven't dealt with the deficit, yes. What did we see? What did we see with failure to deal with the deficit? Spending on the health service cut by 36%. That doesn't help nurses or patients.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I hope the Prime Minister's proud of her record of controlling public sector pay to the extent that hard-working nurses have to access food banks in order to survive. And the frozen wages of teaching assistants, paramedics and council workers. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not just in the public sector. Across the economy, wages are rising by 2.1%, while inflation is nearly 3%. 6 million workers already earn less than the living wage. What does the Prime Minister think that tells us about 7 years of a Conservative government and what it's done to the living standards of those people on whom we all rely to get our public services, our health services, delivered to us?
Prime Minister.
I'll tell the right honourable gentleman what's happened over the last 7 years. We see record numbers of people in employment. Nearly 3 million more people in work. We have seen the introduction of the national living wage, never done by Labour, done by a Conservative government. And we've seen 4 million people taken out of paying income tax altogether, and a cut in income tax and a change in the personal allowance, which is the equivalent of £1,000 a year to basic rate taxpayers, including nurses. That's the record of good management of the economy. You only get it with the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister simply doesn't get it.
Mr. we've got plenty of time. I'm quite happy to run on for some considerable period of time. People who are making an excessive noise should try to calm themselves and perhaps just give a moment's thought to whether they would like to be viewed by their constituents shrieking their heads off. It's very down market. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, there is a low-pay epidemic in this country, and it has a terrible effect on young people. Those in their 20s will earn £12,500 a year less than the generation that went before them. The first generation to be worse off than the last. They're less likely to be able to buy their own home, more likely to be saddled with debt, more likely to be in insecure, low-paid work. Except for more misery, what does the Prime Minister and her government actually offer for the young people of this country?
Yes. To echo those of my colleagues, what we offer young people is more jobs, more homes, an opportunity to own their own home. But let me just tell the right honourable gentleman what isn't fair. It isn't fair to refuse to take tough decisions and to load debts on our children and grandchildren for the future. It isn't fair to bankrupt our economy, because that leads to people losing their jobs and losing their homes. And it isn't fair to go out and tell people that they can have all the public spending they want without paying for it. Labour's way leads to fewer jobs, higher prices, more taxes, and Labour's way means everyone pays the price of labour.
Mr. Speaker, when Tories talk of tough choices, we know who suffers. It's the poorest and most vulnerable within our society. Young people, Mr. Speaker, employed on zero-hours contracts are more likely to have worse mental and physical health. Students who've worked hard at university graduating with £57,000 worth of debt that will stay with them till they retire. Mr. Speaker, let me spell it out to the Prime Minister. This is the only country in which wages have not recovered since the global financial crash. More people are using food banks. 4 million children living in poverty, record in-work poverty, young people who see no prospect of owning their own home, and 6 million earning less than the living wage. The low pay epidemic is a threat to our economic stability. So, can she take some tough choices and, instead of offering platitudes, offer some real help and real support for those in work, young people who deserve better and deserve to be given more optimism rather than greater inequality?
Prime Minister!
We actually now see that the proportion of people in absolute poverty is at record lows. He asks for help for those who are low paid. I'll tell him the help that we've given. I'll reiterate the help that we've given to people who are low paid. We introduced the mandatory national living wage, the lowest earners' fastest pay rise in 20 years. We have cut taxes, taken people out of paying income tax, cut taxes for those who are on basic rate taxpayers. We are doing what is important for this country, which is ensuring there are jobs and an economy providing those jobs for people, because the best route out of poverty is being in work. And I know that the right honourable gentleman has taken to calling himself a government in waiting. Well, we all know what that means. Waiting to put up taxes, waiting to destroy jobs, waiting to bankrupt our country. We will never let it happen.